All right, welcome to day 2 of online coronavirus school. This is Auto Shop. We're still on steering and suspension today. First we're going to start out by watching a short video on how steering and suspension components work together.
Your vehicle's suspension and steering system endures much abuse from potholes and speed bumps. Did you know the force from hitting a pothole or speed bump can exceed several tons? The vehicle's suspension and steering system supports the weight of the vehicle, absorbs shocks and bumps from the road, and allows the front wheels to pivot, allowing steering, and controls the geometry of the tire and road relationship for best traction and handling under changing road conditions. Key components of the suspension system include shocks and struts, springs, control arms, bushings, and ball joints. Key components of the steering system include power steering pump, power steering gear, steering linkage, power steering hoses, steering column, and steering knuckle. The suspension and steering system is critical to the safe operation of your vehicle. Abnormal noises or clunks when rolling over bumps or loose steering should be inspected immediately. Have the system checked periodically to catch potentially dangerous conditions early. Visit your local AC Delco service center for expert service and quality.
Alright, one thing they didn't show you in that video was old school steering system, the one with the smaller gearbox, not the long skinny rack and pinion. But we will go out in the shop in a minute and we'll show you a car that has that old system on it. The biggest thing you need to know for steering and suspension is the names of all the components and whether they're steering components or suspension components. So over on this side, I don't know if you can see it, I'll step over on this side. I have the steering components listed. Steering components are a steering gear, rack and pinion, tie rod, center link, idler arm, adjusting sleeve, ball joint, and the pitman arm. On this side, I have our suspension components: leaf spring, coil spring, torsion bar, shock absorber, McPherson strut, sway bar, control arm, and ball joint. So if you answered something besides ball joint as being both steering and suspension on day 1, you got it wrong. Oh well. Also, I like to cover the shock absorbers and how to tell if they're bad or not. A couple things to look for. The bushings. Look at the bushings to see if they're cracked. If they're cracked or broken or disformed or missing, you need to replace the shock absorber. There's bushings up at the top and bushings down at the bottom. Also look, this shock's got a big old dent in it. That would restrict it from going up and down. So you would have to replace it. Also, if the shock was bent, imagine the top of the shock was bent over like here, it couldn't go up and down anymore, you would also have to replace it. Look for oil leakage. If there's oil dripping off of the shock absorber, you want to also replace it. A slight film of oil on the shaft up here is considered normal, and that's how it self-lubricates. And then this is the last test, and the last test is a physical test. We call it the bumper test. You go to each corner of the car and you bounce it, get it rocking and rolling, bouncing hard, and then let go. It should not bounce more than twice after you let go. The shock absorber's job is to slow down the oscillations of the spring, and if it bounces more than twice, that means that shock absorber is bad. Once you get them off, you can also tell if they're bad by pushing in and out on them. Look how easy this one pushes in and out. This is a bad shock absorber. This one here, on the other hand, I can barely push it in, so this is a good shock absorber. Alright, now we're going to go out in the shop and look at a couple of cars. One of the cars is the old Datsun truck. It's got the old school type steering and suspension on it. And then we have the Datsun, which has McPherson strut and rack and pinion steering. So we're looking at the Datsun right now. Let's look at the steering first. So this box here is the steering gear. The arm coming off it here is the pitman arm. We have our center link. On our center link is our adjusting sleeve to adjust toe in and out. And we have our tie rods here, and obviously here on the other side. So that's our complete steering system. Our suspension system, we have our lower control arm. have our ball joint, a lower ball joint here, an upper ball joint here. We have our upper control arm. There we go, upper control arm. And right in the middle we have our shock absorber right here. Same thing on the other side. We also have our anti-sway bar, or our roll bar. It goes from one side of the suspension over to the other side. So when this side is going up, it's going to push up on this side. This keeps the body of your car level when turning corners sharp. Oh, by the way, has anybody noticed we don't see any springs? Where's the springs on this front end? The answer is this car, or this truck, has torsion bars. This long skinny rod is the spring. It acts as a spring by twisting. It is keyed into the lower control arm here, and it's also keyed into the frame here. If you don't remember how it works, look at the first video and I kind of demonstrate it. The back suspension on this truck is leaf springs. When you have leaf springs, you do not need control arms, so we just need leaf springs and shock absorbers. Okay, on the McPherson strut suspension on the Rotson, let's get a good look at it from the front. Okay, we'll look at the suspension first. We have lower control arm here, and we have our strut, which a strut is a shock absorber and a spring all in one unit. There is no upper control arm, okay? And then our ball joint is also part of the suspension and the steering systems. The steering system, we have our rack and pinion and our tie rods. And of course the ball joint allows it to pivot. We also have a sway bar in front on this car. And then in the back, it's basically the same, but with no steering. It's McPherson strut. So McPherson strut, we have our shock and our spring as one assembly, and we have our lower control arms. The assignment for today is posted on Google Classroom, and the assignment is to make two lists for me. One list of steering components and the other list of suspension components. And remember that ball joint should be on both lists. See you later. Hope you enjoyed the earthquake this morning. It was pretty fun. I was driving a car, and the car, it shifted lanes by about 2 feet, and I thought I hit something in the road, and then I found out later that it was an earthquake. Bye.